I get from people who are saying, thank you, you helped me understand the situation I was in better, you helped connect me with groups that saved my life, you and your story have helped save my life, where now I'm not thinking about committing suicide and now I'm going to get involved with the movement. Those kinds of things outweigh the nonsense 100 to 1. You know, there's been way more support from people out in the open than there has been resistance.
So we talked a little about people, your colleagues, other young men who, and women, I suppose, that you've helped and that you talk to or you relate to. What about those that are not veterans but maybe coming up and maybe reaching age, and we're always looking for a new war to fight and always looking for new fodder for our war plans? So are you reaching them too, or do you, is that part of what you're trying to do?
Absolutely. We do a lot of what we call counter-recruitment effort. This could take place at local community facilities, park programs, but also in the schools. The hard thing to do is to institutionalize this. So as I think most anti-war activists know, but for those out there who don't know, under the No Child Left Behind Act, there's a provision in there that allows the U.S. Army and military entities to recruit in schools, at lunch tables, so on and so forth. So we're battling that. That's the institutionalization of recruitment. From another angle, some teachers are taking a step out there by inviting us to their class. If one of those kids go home and complains to their parents, so on and so forth, sometimes the teachers face repercussions. So there's a lot of those difficulties that you have to play around with if you want to get into the schools themselves. But once we have been into the schools, it's been a great response from the kids. The kids usually, and particularly Latin American and African American kids, are the best and easiest crowds to talk to. You don't have to explain to them why the system's screwed up. They know the system's screwed up. They know that people are lying to them. They know that going to war isn't going to solve problems. You know, it seems as though once people grow up, that's when they have these ideas that like war is going to solve problems. You can go ask a 12-year-old kid, do you think it would solve your problem if we went and killed everybody in the neighborhood? And he would say, oh my God, no, you know. But then you go ask somebody who's like 40 years old and say, get rid of everybody on the block, you know. That attitude, you know. And so no, for me, some of the most interesting and best experiences I've had have been with the kids. However, I have to say, I think it's very difficult, especially in today's economy and with what's happening, to ask people who are coming from some of the poorest elements in society in a nation with no or little to no subsidized secondary education, no universal health care program, joblessness, homelessness, poverty, so on and so forth, to ask them not to join or to tell them not to join and to not have a viable alternative for them. That's what I think is the biggest difficulty I've found doing counter-recruitment work. When somebody comes to me and tells me they have 2 or 3 kids and they need health care and they need a shelter, well, yeah, the military will provide that. And yes, you might have to go do some very nasty things and you might end up being killed. But the fact of the matter is your short-term interests are taking care of your kids, your loved one, so on and so forth. I can understand it. I just think the challenge for us or for anti-war activists who are out there is to find alternatives for them. So that way we're not just going to them and saying, hey, don't join. Well, it's, hey, don't join the military because we have X, Y, and Z for you. You know, try one of these routes. And for me, that's been the biggest difficulty in trying to do counter-recruitment.
2 more things before we start winding down. I have a personal question about are young people today being desensitized by so many video games and violence in movies and music and that, and so that they're more apt to, once they go to a foreign land and they're told that these people are either turban heads or sand monkey, whatever the kind of derogatory things, so they dehumanize the enemy and they're desensitized back here. Do you think there's something like that? And then I wanted to just ask a little bit about veterans benefits to finish up.
Well, the bigger context for media consumption, I think, needs to be noted. So Northwestern University just did a study a couple years ago that indicated that the average American watches 45 hours per week of television every week. On top of that, they spend another 28 hours in front of their laptop, cell phone, iPad, iPod, or music system. So that's a total of around, what is that, 45, 20? So around 70, 80 hours of media consumption a week on average by the average American. So yes, I mean, on one level, I think it goes without saying that if indeed the vast majority of that media consumption is around militaristic video games that promote violence, movies that promote violence and have no redeeming qualities, TV shows that have no redeeming qualities except for, you know, this like explicit sex and the objectification of women, racist comments, racist jokes, sexist jokes, and then violence. You know, the violence, of course, always sells. Yes, I can obviously see how there's a level of dehumanization and then also a training period. I mean, I often mention to people when they ask why I joined the military that I was trained to join the military from a very young age. I mean, my brother and I played cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians, army, with everybody on the block played army. That was what you did. You know, you ran around in the woods, you had plastic guns or guns you made out of broomsticks or whatever, running around pretending like you're shooting each other. I mean, so in some ways I feel like we're trained to do this from a very young age, and I do think that's problematic. I mean, if the vast majority of people are consuming that much media and all of that media is glorifying war, for instance, one of the most popular games out there right now is called Call of Duty. It's a video game where it's like military special forces operations. Their video game that came out in 2012 had a scenario where you had to infiltrate Occupy Wall Street, and the Occupy Wall Street person was a terrorist who was going to plant a bomb in New York City, and part of your mission in the video game was to foil this terrorist plot.
I didn't know that.
So this is in 2012.
Wow.
This is in the biggest, most popular selling video game for PlayStation 3 right now. It is literally the most popular video game in the world.
Wow.
And these are the kinds of missions that they have people going on. So simultaneously, you have concerned citizens in the street trying to fight for economic, social justice, and then the biggest video game in the world putting out scenarios where those very people are the terrorists, the enemy, and so forth. Yes, I think that has a profound impact. We should also mention that the drones that they're using, the handle and the systems that they're using are actually modeled after the PlayStation 2 controller, knowing that an entire generation of people who came up prior to the use of drones, I know how to use a PlayStation controller because I've been playing PlayStation since I was 10 years old. I mean, I don't play it anymore, but for 10 years, I was very familiar with the controller, the training, all of this. And it should also, this is a very important point, the studies that have come out from the Brookings Institute indicate that drone operators actually have twice the rate of suicide as infantry combat soldiers. That's something that needs to be noted because people are saying, oh, you know, it's a very detached form of war. People are going to be very dehumanized from it or desensitized. It's actually been the opposite. The difference from the way that the doctors at the Brookings Institute explained it was that for artillery people, mortar people, tankers, and so forth, and even traditional fighter jet pilots, when you drop the bomb, you're gone. So in other words, you're flying, the bomb drops, you're gone. You're in an artillery battery. You know, you fire the artillery round, but you don't see what it hits 6 miles down the road. What the drone operators are seeing on the screen is the actual strike and then the aftermath of the strike as well. So they're watching the aftermath as it takes place in real time. So that means people's body parts on the ground, family members coming out into the streets screaming, wailing, trying to carry people's bodies back to safety. So that's what the drone operators are seeing, and that in a lot of ways is causing them to now kill themselves at twice the rate of infantry soldiers.
Before we move to the veterans benefits and where we're at today on that, it brought up another question when you talked about this video game, which I had no idea of, that is teaching young people to take out people like in Occupy Wall Street and that. Do you think, or is it your experience that maybe taught you that what you're being trained to do overseas might be used back here in the States for people like myself, like Nick, like Mike over here that work in the anti-war movement or in other social justice movements here in the States?
Well, yeah, there's actually a lot of great work that a scholar from the University of Madison, Wisconsin, Alfred C. McCoy, has done a lot of work actually following the Spanish-American War and the war in the Philippines. A lot of the surveillance and torture techniques that were used in that war were then brought home and used against protesters, mainly Union protesters in the early part of the 20th century. excuse me, the same counterinsurgency tactics that they were using in Vietnam were then used with the COINTEL program to dismantle the American Indian movement, the Black Panthers, Students for a Democratic Society, and any other number of groups that they dismantled after that happened, and after the 68 era. That's happening again now. I mean, you look at the militarization of the police.